The morning started like any other in Oakwood Estates. Birds chirping, sprinklers hissing, and the distinct sound of Karen Wilcox's heels clicking aggressively down the sidewalk. As president of our HOA, Karen conducted her daily compliance checks, with clipboard in hand and a scowl that could curdle milk. I watched from my home office window as she photographed a neighbor's slightly overgrown lawn, muttering something about property values and neighborhood standards. I'd managed to stay under Karen's radar for nearly 2 years since moving in. That streak ended when my sister's kids came to stay with me while she recovered from surgery. The kids, being kids, wanted to set up a lemonade stand with a hand-painted sign. They were raising money for their mom's medical bills, a gesture so sweet it would melt anyone's heart. Anyone except Karen Wilcox, apparently. I was helping my niece and nephew, ages 8 and 10, set up their little table when I saw Karen marching toward us, her face contorted with what I can only describe as righteous indignation. Her perfectly highlighted bob bounced with each determined step. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice dripping with false politeness. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I smiled, trying to keep things light in front of the kids. "Just helping my niece and nephew set up a little lemonade stand. Would you like to be our first customer?" Karen's eyes narrowed as she pulled out the HOA handbook, seemingly from thin air. Section 12, paragraph 4 clearly states that no signs, advertisements, or commercial activities are permitted in front yards without board approval. She tapped her manicured finger against the page. "Did you submit your request form? Did you get approval from the architectural committee?" The kids looked up at me, their excitement fading. "It's just lemonade, Karen," I said, trying to reason with her. "They're raising money for their mom, my sister, who's recovering from surgery." "Rules are rules," she replied with a smug smile. "Take it down immediately or I'll be forced to issue a violation." I could see my niece's eyes welling up with tears, and my nephew's shoulders slumping. "We'll move it to the backyard," I conceded, not wanting to upset the kids further. "We can invite some neighbors over instead." Karen sniffed disapprovingly. "Backyard gatherings over 6 people require a community event application. I assume you haven't filed that either." I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. "We'll figure something out. Thanks for the reminder about the rules." "See that you do," she said as she walked away, already typing something into her phone. That should have been the end of it. I moved the kids and their lemonade stand to the backyard, invited a few neighbors via text, and tried to salvage the day. But Karen, it seemed, was just getting started. The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my front door, citing unauthorized signage and commercial activity, with a $200 fine. $200 for a children's lemonade stand that never even opened. When I called the HOA office to appeal, I was told that Karen had called an emergency board meeting the previous evening where they had unanimously voted to increase penalties for commercial signage violations. I knew then that this wasn't about rules, it was about power. Karen had found a new target, and unfortunately, it was me. Over the next week, Karen's surveillance became increasingly obvious. She'd park her white SUV across from my house, pretending to check her phone while clearly monitoring my comings and goings. When the kids played in the yard, she'd walk by multiple times, taking photos of anything that could possibly be construed as a violation. Their bikes left on the lawn for more than 30 minutes, chalk drawings on my driveway, even the height of the grass near my mailbox. The final straw came when my neighbors, the Patels, organized a neighborhood bike parade to cheer up the kids. The children were decorating their bikes with streamers in the Patels' driveway when Karen stormed over, demanding they disperse immediately because they hadn't obtained permits for a public gathering on community property. Mrs. Patel tried to explain that they were simply on their own driveway, but Karen threatened to call the police for disturbing the peace. The children, already nervous from Karen's previous encounters, scattered like startled birds. My niece ran to me in tears, asking if the police were going to take them away. That was when I decided enough was enough. I'm generally a peaceful, rule-following guy, but seeing a grown woman terrorize children over streamers and bike decorations awakened something in me. I reached out to other neighbors and discovered I wasn't alone. Karen had been abusing her position for years, selectively enforcing rules against people she didn't like while ignoring violations by her friends on the board. We organized a neighborhood meeting in the community park, public property beyond Karen's jurisdiction, to discuss how to address the situation. Nearly 30 households sent representatives, all with their own Karen horror stories. We decided to petition for a special election to remove her from the board, as allowed by the HOA bylaws if 20% of homeowners supported it. When Karen got wind of our meeting, she went nuclear. The next day, every household that attended received violation notices for infractions ranging from improper trash can storage to unauthorized plant species. My notice cited 5 violations totaling over $1,000 in fines. Rather than backing down, we accelerated our petition efforts, going door to door with documentation of Karen's selective enforcement and abuse of power. Within 3 days, we had signatures from over 40% of homeowners, double what we needed to force a special election. The morning after we submitted our petition to the HOA management company, I woke up to find my front yard filled with official-looking signs: violation, pending legal action, property under review. There must have been 20 signs, all bearing the HOA logo, creating the impression that my home was somehow condemned or under investigation. When I tried to remove them, Karen appeared as if she'd been waiting around the corner. "Those are official HOA notices," she said with a triumphant smile. "Removing them is a separate violation carrying a $500 penalty each." "This is harassment, Karen," I told her firmly. "These signs aren't authorized by the full board, and you know it." "I'm the president," she replied, her voice rising. "And I've had enough of your disrespect for our community standards." Neighbors began coming outside, drawn by our confrontation. Karen seemed to feed off the audience, becoming more animated. "This man," she announced to the gathering crowd, "is attempting to undermine the very rules that protect your property values. Do you want to live in a neighborhood where anyone can just do whatever they want?" To her evident surprise, several neighbors spoke up in my defense. The Patels recounted how she had terrorized the children's bike parade. The Johnsons mentioned her selective enforcement. The Garcias brought up how she had approved her friend's massive boat storage but fined them for a basketball hoop. Karen's face reddened as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. "Fine," she snapped. "We'll settle this at the special election. But until then, these violations stand, and I'll be adding interference with HOA business to your growing list of infractions." She stormed off, but not before I noticed her taking photos of the neighbors who had spoken against her. I had a sinking feeling that they'd soon find violation notices of their own. The following Saturday, the kids were helping me plant flowers in the backyard when I heard pounding on my front door. When I answered, Karen stood there with 2 men I recognized from the HOA board, both looking uncomfortable. "We're here for a site inspection," Karen announced, attempting to push past me into my home. I blocked the doorway. "I didn't receive any notice of an inspection." "Emergency inspections don't require notice," she replied with a smirk. Section 21, Paragraph 8. I stood my ground. "You need permission to enter my home, Karen. That's not an HOA rule, that's the law." The male board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them, Bob, spoke up. "Maybe we should reschedule, Karen. Send proper notice." "No." Karen's composure slipped. "He's in violation, and we need to document it before he hides the evidence." "Evidence of what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Running an illegal business. Those children have been going door to door selling things without permits. We've received complaints." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The kids had delivered thank-you cookies to neighbors who had been kind to them, not selling anything. "That's ridiculous, and you know it," I told her firmly. "The kids are in the backyard planting flowers. They're not running a black market cookie operation. Let us in, or I'll call the police and report suspicious activity," Karen threatened, her voice rising. The board members were now visibly distressed. "Karen, that's going too far," Bob protested. "We can't just call the police without." "Watch me," Karen snapped, pulling out her phone and dialing. "Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity and possible child endangerment," she said into the phone, while staring directly at me with a cold smile. My blood ran cold. "Child endangerment? Karen, this is insane." She continued speaking to the 911 operator. Yes, there are children being forced to conduct illegal commercial activities. No, I can't see them now because this man won't let me in to check on their welfare. Yes, I'm concerned for their safety. The male board members backed away, wanting no part of this insanity. One of them mouthed, "Sorry," to me as they retreated to the street. I closed the door and hurried to the backyard to check on the kids, who were happily patting soil around marigolds, blissfully unaware of the situation unfolding. I called my sister to explain what was happening, then my neighbor Mark, who happened to be an attorney. Within 20 minutes, 2 police cars pulled up outside my house. Karen was still there, now joined by a small group of curious onlookers. The officers approached cautiously, and I met them at the front door. "Officers, I believe you received a call about children in danger," I said calmly. "My niece and nephew are in the backyard planting flowers. They're here visiting while their mother recovers from surgery. This woman," I gestured toward Karen, "is the HOA president who has been harassing us over trivial rule violations. She's now escalated to making false reports." The officers asked to verify the children's welfare, which I immediately allowed. One officer followed me to the backyard where the kids were playing, while the other stayed to speak with Karen. After seeing the children were obviously fine and hearing a bit of context from me, the first officer seemed to understand the situation. When we returned to the front, the scene had changed dramatically. Karen was now shouting at the other officer, "You need to remove those children from his custody. He's exploiting them. There are violations. I'm the president." The officer tried to calm her. "Ma'am, we've verified the children are safe. This appears to be an HOA dispute, not a police matter." Karen's face contorted with rage. "Then arrest him for vandalizing HOA property." He removed official signage. "Do you have proof of ownership of these signs?" the officer asked. "I'm the HOA president. I don't need proof." I stepped forward. "Officers, I have documentation showing that proper procedures weren't followed for posting these signs. The full board never voted on this action as required by our bylaws." Mark, my attorney neighbor, had arrived and backed me up with specific bylaw citations. The officers, now clearly recognizing the situation for what it was, began to disengage. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter between you and the homeowner. I suggest you take it up through proper channels." As they turned to leave, Karen completely lost control. "You can't leave. I won't allow it. Those children are staying right here until this man complies with HOA regulations." She lunged toward my yard where the kids had now come around from the backyard, curious about all the commotion. The officers immediately moved to intercept her, but not before she grabbed my niece's arm. "You're not going anywhere until your uncle follows the rules." Everything happened very quickly after that. My niece screamed in terror, the officers restrained Karen, and I rushed to comfort the frightened children. Karen was shouting incoherently about property values and violations as the officers handcuffed her and read her rights, charging her with assault of a minor and making false statements to law enforcement. As they placed her in the back of the police car, the reality of her situation seemed to finally dawn on her. Her face paled as she looked out at the gathered neighbors, many of whom were recording the incident on their phones. "You can't do this to me," she protested, her voice quavering. "I'm the HOA president." The officer simply replied, "Not anymore, ma'am." 3 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom as the judge sentenced Karen to 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management classes, and a $5,000 fine for her false report and assault charge. She was also slapped with a restraining order preventing her from coming within 100 feet of my niece and nephew or my property. As the gavel came down, Karen's perfectly maintained facade finally crumbled completely. "But what about my reputation?" she wailed, mascara streaming down her face. "What about my position on the board?" The judge looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Wilcox, I suggest you worry less about yard signs and more about the serious legal consequences of your actions." Court dismissed.